Our guest today is Professor Barry Schwartz, previously Professor of Social Theory and Social Action at Swarthmore College, and currently Visiting Professor of Management at the University of California, Berkeley. He is a jack of all trades in psychology, with research centered around decision-making, morality, satisfaction, learning, and practical wisdom, just to name a few fields. Today, Barry's going to take us through something that's on all of our minds right now, COVID-19, specifically focusing on security, wealth, and happiness. What possible lessons can we learn from this pandemic? And with that, I'll hand the stage, or in this case, the screen, over to Barry.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about this. And I want to start by saying that anyone who tries to predict the future at this moment is a fool. And so I don't know what the future is going to be for any of us. And as I've thought about it in connection with COVID-19 and the pandemic, that was hard enough. But on top of that, the United States for sure, and much of the rest of the world, I gather, has been completely rocked by the sort of racial racism that is now, structural racism that is now apparent in the US, but not unique to the US. And that just adds another layer of enormous uncertainty to what the future world, when the future world will begin, when is the first day of the rest of our lives, and what it will look like. And so I want to start out by being very, very humble about guesses that I'm going to make about lessons one might learn from what we've been going through now. There was a U.S. president named Ronald Reagan years ago, quite conservative. And when he was campaigning, his tagline was that the most dangerous sentence in the English language was, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." This was a small government conservative. Get the government out of our lives. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has taught us in the US, and I suspect in England as well, and my guess is Brazil as well, is that there's a more dangerous sentence than "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." And that sentence is, "I'm from the government, you're on your own." And societies in which that has been true or largely true, have really suffered disastrously from the pandemic. And societies where the government seemed to be prepared and took a fairly stern hand in trying to regulate how people lived, have managed to get through this with less physical and psychological and economic devastation. So the question, though, is, what are we going to learn from this? It may be that companies, for example, will learn that they need to pay more attention to stakeholders, even at the occasional expense of shareholders. They may be discovering, we may all be discovering, that ordinary folks who we are now celebrating as heroes, the people who stock the shelves and deliver the goods and provide health services, they were just as much heroes 3 months ago as they are now. But 3 months ago, they were invisible heroes, and now they are highly visible heroes. What will they be when this pandemic recedes and we go back to living life more or less the way we did before? People may be discovering that connection to other people is much more important than connection to stuff, because we have been deprived in serious ways of connection to other people. And they may be discovering, and this will be the focus of my talk, that as important as freedom of choice is to our well-being, just as important is security. Security being something we have largely taken for granted until the pandemic came and made all of us remarkably insecure. And it may be that we come out of this more than willing to give up a certain amount of our freedom of choice in return for a little bit more security. And that's what I want to focus on. This balance between security on the one hand and freedom of choice on the other. Put another way, it's a balance between security and wealth. And I mean wealth sort of metaphorically. More than 100 years ago, a very distinguished biologist, observing the way evolution shaped organisms, uttered this sentence. He said, from the point of view of evolution, security is more important than wealth. And what he meant was that if you go with your friends in a walk through the woods, you have a wealth of experience. You see all kinds of beautiful things. You smell wonderful smells. You hear great sounds. All these rich sensory systems that you have are attuned to what the world is presenting you in this beautiful forest. Well, this biologist said, the forest is a very different place for a squirrel. A squirrel running around in the forest doesn't notice most of the stuff that you notice. But what it does is notice the things that it has to notice in order to survive. For you and me, the forest is a complicated, rich, wealthy place, wealth of experience. For the squirrel, it is a simple, not so complicated place. And his argument is that the way evolution works is that it builds in redundancy and it builds sensory systems so that organisms can't miss the things they have to notice so that they can find food, mate, and avoid being eaten by bigger animals. And he says, as I say, as a general rule, what evolution cares about is that our existence is secure in the sense that we will be able to survive and reproduce, and doesn't care so much that our existence is full of wealth, a wealth of experience. Now, for squirrels, for most organisms, this trade-off between wealth of experience and security is built into their biology. They never had to make a decision to sacrifice a certain amount of richness in their life to gain a certain amount of security. For people, these trade-offs don't come from biology. They come from culture. Some cultures, as we know, have enormous constraints on us, on the kinds of things we can experience. And the magnitude of those constraints we experience as oppressive. We can't do the things we want to do. We can't live the lives we want to live. And we want to break the shackles of all these constraints. In other cultures, like, for example, the consumer culture that I live in the US, they have strived for generations to shed all of these constraints. And so in modern America, people are pretty much free to do and be whatever they want based largely on how thick their wallets are. When things are going well, we radically underappreciate and underestimate just how uncertain the world is. And we overestimate our ability to control the things that matter. And the result is that we downplay the significance of being secure against disaster because disasters don't happen. And we overestimate the importance of being free to experience, do, and be whatever we want because, in a safe environment, that's what life is all about. Dramatic events like the pandemic and a decade before, the financial meltdown, the world financial meltdown, I think should remind us of just how important security against an uncertain future is. And what happens is they do remind us of the importance of security, but then societies recover, economies recover, events level out, and we very quickly forget the lesson that we learned during the time of the crisis. And I'm hoping that maybe this time will be different. And I think a major culprit in our underappreciation of the importance of security is our worship of efficiency. Efficiency is the god of the modern economy. Use less to get more. same-day delivery, multitasking. Efficiency is a good thing. Inefficiency is wasteful. Economists teach us that increased efficiency is really the only way a society's standard of living can improve. If your company raises your pay, that's good news. But if it raises your pay, if the way it's able to raise your pay is by raising the prices of the stuff that it sells, and every other company does the same thing, everybody's pay goes up, but the cost of everything people buy goes up by just as much, and so you end up running in place. So the only way for material improvement in people's lives to occur is for companies to figure out ways to make the same amount of stuff at lower cost. In other words, to become more efficient. And the more efficient an economy is, the more our material standard of living improves. And so efficiency is the god of economic progress. If we want to make material progress, we have to become more efficient. What does that mean? It means streamlining supply chains. It means just-in-time delivery of materials. It means no slack in the workforce so that everybody is working hard all day to produce whatever good or service is being produced. No assets sit idle. Every dollar spent leads to a dollar earned. And if you do all of those things, your life as a consumer gets better and better. When you're designing a car, the enemies of efficiency are forces like friction and air resistance. And car manufacturers struggle to squeeze as many miles per gallon as they possibly can in their car designs. Their aim is to design a vehicle that uses every ounce of fuel to move the car forward. Air resistance and the grab of the road hold it back. They are wasted energy. And so it is in the world of finance. What you want to do in the world of finance is eliminate or reduce, insofar as you can, friction. Now the friction we're talking about is friction involved in transactions. Hard as it is to imagine, societies did not always have money. The invention of money went a long way toward reducing the friction, the inefficiency in financial transactions. Imagine that you're a potato farmer and you have to bring sacks of potatoes to the marketplace to trade them for eggs and milk. It's a real drag on economic exchange. If instead you can just bring money, then these economic exchanges become more effortless, more frictionless, and the result is that the economy becomes more productive. Money reduces the financial coefficient of drag, if you like. And arguably, much that has happened in the financial world in the last 200 years is a continuation of the revolution in efficiency that money began. Take credit. Credit is huge because now you can go shopping for eggs and milk without even having the money. The farmer can promise to pay at a later date after the potatoes get harvested. Similarly, the farmer doesn't have to save up surplus from many years of bumper crops to expand the farm, to put more acres under cultivation. Instead, he can take a loan and increase the amount of land that he's farming and then pay over time for that, to pay off that loan over time, in part from proceeds from newly cultivated acres. So all of these changes in the financial system are changes that enhance efficiency by reducing friction. And more recently, financial markets have been all about efficiency. This is one way, I think, to understand the frequently made distinction that people talk about between the real economy, whatever that is, and the financial economy. You know, the real economy has all kinds of friction. You got to drive to the store. You got to look in the aisles. The storekeepers have to restock the shelves. All of that is inefficient. But in the financial economy, you've got transactions occurring almost like point masses moving around in a vacuum. There's nothing to stop them. There's nothing to slow them down. Transactions can occur with lightning speed, and nothing slows them down. I read recently that this high-speed trading on Wall Street has made the single most important decision that firms have to make, where to locate their offices, because you want to locate your office so that your buy signal or sell signal gets to the market a nanosecond faster than your competition's does. So we're now operating with such efficiency that nanoseconds matter when it comes to the price of the things you're buying and selling. Each of these developments and others have made it easier for us to do business without wasting time and energy. And that's obviously a good thing. You may employ your lazy brother-in-law who is not earning his keep. And if you try to do something about it, you will encounter enormous friction from your spouse. You can't fire him, right? But if some private equity firm buys you out, they won't have any trouble getting rid of your brother-in-law and replacing him with somebody who's actually more productive. So increased efficiency is good, and removing friction increases efficiency. But one of the things that the financial crisis taught us, or at least taught some of us, is that maybe there could be too much of a good thing. If loans were not securitized the way they were, bankers might have actually had to take the time to assess the creditworthiness of everyone who was applying for a loan. But when you're taking all these loans and bundling them into securities, you can basically give a loan to anybody, expect a few people to default, but it really won't matter to the viability of the securitized loan. So all the work, all the friction involved in making sure that I'm creditworthy and you're creditworthy goes out the window. Just give everybody a loan and then bundle them, and it doesn't matter if there are some defaults. Credit card companies have been doing this for years. They don't care if some people default on their credit card, as long as most people pay, especially given the interest rates that credit cards carry. They can handle a few defaults, and they don't need anybody working in the office to judge whether or not you're worth your financial circumstances justify you having a credit card. So some efficiency is good. The financial crisis taught us that more efficiency is not necessarily better. There can be too much of a good thing. And about a decade ago, the psychologist Adam Grant and I published an article in which we suggested that this too much of a good thing phenomenon was actually quite general. So we know some motivation produces excellent performance. Too much motivation produces choking. Some arousal stimulates creative, active curiosity. Too much arousal produces fear and cowering in a corner. Some working together as a group produces cohesion and enhances productivity. Too much working in a group leads to staleness. Some empathy enables you to understand what another person is going through and maybe to be helpful. Too much may prevent you from saying and doing hard things. And in my own work, I have argued that whereas a life with no freedom of choice is not worth living, a life with too much choice leads to paralysis, leads to bad decisions, and it leads to dissatisfaction even with even good decisions. So we need choice, but we need the right amount of choice. More of it doesn't necessarily make life better. More of a good thing does not necessarily make life better. Finding the right amount of collaboration, choice, empathy, and many other aspects of life and personality, finding what the philosopher Aristotle called the mean, and he did not mean the arithmetic average. It's the real challenge we face. And we face it as individuals, what's the right amount of choice for me? And we face it as society, what's the right amount of freedom of choice to offer an entire society? Finding the right amount is not easy. The poet William Blake said centuries ago that perhaps the only way to figure out how much is enough is by experiencing too much. And what I argued in my book about the paradox of choice is that, at least in rich societies, we have experienced too much. And with regard to the financial crisis, what I would suggest when it comes to efficiency is, again, that we have experienced too much. And I think the financial crisis taught some of us that. What about COVID? What has it taught us? As this pandemic crests, assuming that it will eventually crest, and starts to ease, attention will inevitably turn, as it already has, to the lack of preparation that the pandemic revealed. Attention will be paid, as it should be, to stockpiling key supplies and machines, to the level of hospital capacity, to the robustness of supply chains, and stuff like that. Certainly, we are doing a lot of hand-wringing in the US about all of those things right now. And no doubt when the dust settles, we will be readier for the next pandemic than we were for this one. We can give ourselves a collective pat on the back. So thinking about stockpiles and supply chains will be important the day after the pandemic subsides. But what should we be thinking about the day after that? And I think that while we are busy improving our stockpiling, we need to do some stock taking as well. Let's apply the lessons from the financial crisis to the pandemic. Arguably, it is inefficient to have warehouses full of goods that may never be needed. The money spent on masks and gowns that gather dust in some warehouse could instead be put to productive use in the marketplace. It is inefficient to have more people employed than you need under ordinary circumstances. It is inefficient to make everything that goes into your products yourself rather than relying on an international supply chain that exploits what economists call comparative advantage. And since the growth of our standard of living depends on efficiency, every inefficient thing we do takes a little bite out of our capacity to consume. Are we living to live less well now by building into production and storage a set of hedges against an uncertain future? Seen in this light, I think at least some inefficiency is like an insurance policy. Think about insurance. Every year that you don't get into a car accident, you have wasted your car insurance premium. Every year your house doesn't burn down, you've wasted your homeowner's insurance premium. Every year you're healthy, you've wasted your health insurance premium. Every year you don't die, you've wasted your term life insurance premium. All this waste adds up. You'd be living a much better life without all those insurance premiums to pay. Some years ago, with a struggle, I convinced my aging mother to buy health insurance that supplements the government-provided health insurance for senior citizens. We call it a Medigap insurance policy. Her resources were modest, and the policy was not cheap, so it took work to get her to agree to do it. The year went by, and happily, she had no serious medical conditions that required the use of her supplemental insurance policy. So when the time came to renew it, she was extremely resistant because she said she had wasted the money last year buying the insurance. And so, being snarky and not a very good son, I said, maybe, Mom, maybe next year you'll be lucky and you'll get really sick. And then you'll get full value out of your insurance policy. Well, that's the way you have to think about it. Is it a waste of money to insure against catastrophes that don't happen? We get more and more inclined to feel that way as the stability and security of the life we live get more and more taken for granted. What does insurance buy us? One way to think about it is that it enables us to be resilient against shocks that might befall us from a world that is radically uncertain. And what I want to suggest is that the world we live in is radically uncertain. big and consequential stuff happens, and there's no way of predicting when it will happen, what form it will take, and what impact it will have on our lives. What should we do in the face of radical uncertainty? I think instead of asking ourselves which option will give us the best results, the most efficient ones, we should be asking which options will give us good enough results under the widest range of future states of the world. Instead of trying to maximize returns on our investments in our retirement accounts, we should be setting a goal, a financial goal, and then choosing investments that will allow us to achieve that goal under a wide set of future financial circumstances. Instead of looking for the best job, we should be looking for a job that will be good enough, satisfying enough as coworkers and managers come and go and the future economy gyrates. Instead of choosing the best university to go to, we should be choosing one that will be good enough, even if we end up with an obnoxious roommate and a boring biology teacher. The term that I have used to describe this approach to decision making is satisficing. I didn't make the term up, I borrowed it. Satisficing with an eye toward radical uncertainty in the future, you might call robust satisficing, looking for a good enough result that will be resilient and robust to an unpredictable future. Satisficing is a kind of insurance. It's insurance against financial meltdowns, global pandemics, nasty bosses, boring teachers, and crappy roommates. Now, insurance is not sexy. Insurance is stodgy. It's like a guy who wears a belt and suspenders. We make fun of people who wear belts and suspenders. Perhaps we don't need both, but what happens if we have neither? Then, just as we're called upon to run away from danger, we trip as our pants gather at our ankles. Insurance provides us with some security against an uncertain future. When life seems to be business as usual, we can get really complacent about the importance of security, and we shouldn't. And I think a deep flaw revealed in our lack of readiness for the pandemic is a manifestation of our societies, and this is not true of all societies, I acknowledge, our society's unbridled pursuit of efficiency. Things don't have to be this way. We can use the current catastrophe as an opportunity to bring a little bit of friction back into our lives. We could work to rekindle certain social norms that serve to slow us down. For example, if people thought about their homes less as investments and more as places to live, full of the friction of kids and schools and dogs and friends and neighbors and community organizations that come attached, there might be less speculation with an eye toward house flipping, less craziness to the housing market. And if companies felt the friction of being caretakers of their communities, they might look a little bit differently at streamlining their operations by eliminating jobs. We'd all like a car that gets 100 miles to a gallon. The forces of friction that slow us down are an expensive annoyance. But when we're driving a car, we usually know where we're going and we're in control. Fast is good, though even here, a little bit of friction can forestall disaster if we encounter an icy road. Driving is perilous enough, and life is not as predictable as driving. We don't always know where we're going. We're not always in control. Black ice is everywhere. COVID-19 is the mother of icy roads, and a little something to slow us down in the uncertain world we inhabit may save our lives. Building friction into the system is building resilience into the system, and it may be our insurance policy against catastrophe. So will people learn this and other lessons from the pandemic and change how they live and what they value? If so, the world we live in when this trauma lifts may be very, very different from the world we lived in when the trauma started. However, we may just bounce like a rubber band back into making the same sort of mistakes as individuals and as society that we made before the pandemic began? What can we do to make sure that the lessons that we are learning in these days of trauma are lessons that we will apply after the trauma ends? What can we do to make sure that we and our fellow citizens don't forget? I don't know the answer to that, so I call upon people in the audience to supply it. Thank you very much.